And we're back, Stripe Show podcast on a Thursday. I'm Travis Fulton. Instruction Thursday, we're back. First one of January. It's only fitting. The guy that won in Honolulu, Chris Kirk, his longtime coach, joins me. Mr. Scott Hamilton. First off, congratulations. Chris Kirk, his sixth win on the PGA Tour. Looks like you're going to be able to keep the lights on a little bit longer up there in that studio, buddy.
Yeah, no, I haven't ever started out that hot before, so that's pretty fun. Yeah.
Well, it's a good start. They go back to back, of course. Now they're over in Wailea, and before we came on the podcast, how many guys you got playing?
I think I have 7. I'm not positive, but I think I have 7. Yeah.
How do you keep it? Do you go to sleep at night with it? Is there like one or two of them that are like, man, I can't get this dude out of my head? And then,
yeah, it's like whoever's struggling to spend the most, it's who you end up spending the most time with and who you worry about all the time. It's like, it's really cool for guys in top 10, but like most instructors that teach on tour, who you care about is the guy that missed the cut,
Yeah, it's because it's a matter of time, right? I mean, it's like you can't just play great golf all the time. I mean, the game's going to catch up to you. You're going to have some bad weeks.
Downs. Yeah, there's not a lot of Tiger Woods out there that did what he did for all those years. I mean, you see it with like Justin Thomas kind of had an off year last year, and Ricky kind of got back last year. It's just there's highs and lows in the game. I mean, Kirk is a perfect example. Like, I think it was 2 years ago, and time runs. I've done this so long, but it runs ago. I think 2 years ago, after Kirk took that time off to fix his life, he I think it's like his last start was Hawaii, and I think he finished second to retain his tour card. So, I mean, it was one of the most clutch things I'd ever seen in my life. So, but I mean, there was a guy that was, trying to keep his status, and now he's won twice, like in the last year. So, it's crazy.
The first time I met Chris was, I think it was 2000 or 2020, and he took some time away. He was coming back, putting his life together. He got sober and the whole bit. And he didn't get into the PGA Tour event. So he drove down to my neck of the woods. I'm in Ponte Vedra. And he played in the Corn Ferry Tour event down in King and Bear, just south of here in St. Augustine. And so he's like, yeah, I'm driving down there. And I called him. I was like, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast, share your story. We were one of the first ones to do that. It was one of our most well-received podcasts we've ever done. And so I follow Chris and I watch him, and he shoots like 27 under, for 4 rounds at the King and Bear. And I'm just thinking to myself, I've played the King and Bear 150 times. And that guy just went around 4 times and shot like 27 under par on this golf course. Absurd. And as I was driving back, and I'm thinking to myself, as Chris Kirk is coming back, I'm thinking, I don't think people realize how great of a player Chris Kirk was, before he took some time away. I mean, this guy that won 4 times on the PGA Tour, and he takes some time away, comes back, he's got to get his feet underneath him, and he wins last year. Not a bit surprised. He starts the season this year, goes over and gets 6 wins. On the show on Tuesday, I talked about Xander Schauffele has 7 wins, and we hold Schauffele up here like he's this great player in the PGA Tour, and he's a wonderful player. But Chris Kirk has 6. I mean, Chris Kirk is right there with a guy like Xander Schauffele. So no one should be surprised to see Chris Kirk coming back out and winning. And I have a feeling it's not over. I mean, this guy's going to keep going.
Nah, I think he's in the best. I mean, I've taught him since like 2014 or something like that. I think he's definitely in the best physical shape he's ever been. He hit the gym really hard. He's got a guy that helps him train.
Yeah.
I mean, he's always been tall and thin. He's taller than people think. They're always shocked when they get around him. How tall he is. So he's always been lanky, and he's just a little better put together in his shoulders and through his arms and everything, which I think is going to help him a bunch.
So let's get into a swing, because you and I were texting, and these Thursday podcasts do well. We can a little coach speak back and forth, talk about not only what it is that you're working on with a particular player, but also just I think some general concepts that get kicked around in social media, whether on TV, and just shed some light on different patterns that are out there, right? That we see and how they work together. The most common And the sexiest in 2024 and 2023 is this shallow and rotate, right? It's like get some flexion in the lead wrist, get the shaft to lay down in the right forearm, and then from there, just get the hell out of the way, right? Rotate, lean the shaft forward, off you go. And we see a lot of players play successfully like that. Victor Hovland probably, is a little bit of the poster child of that. But you look at Chris Kirk and you look at this swing, and for those watching on YouTube, you can see the sequence that I put up. And this is a wedge swing. Chris is a wonderful wedge player. And I want to talk about not only this pattern, but just his wedge play in general. And the first thing, Scott, that I'll throw out there, and I'll let you take it here, is, you look at that club coming down, right, in that fourth frame, and you look at the shaft maybe, in between the right and left forearm. It's not, laying down on that right forearm. It's not shallow, as we would call it. And so it's a little steeper coming down. And then you look at him through the strike, and Chris is not one that is flying open, right? He's rotating, but he's not, crazy rotated open like we would see with a Dustin Johnson. And as a result of that, his club would maybe swing a little more down the line. His club face would rotate over a little bit more into post impact. And so this is a pattern as well, right? It's not one that's shallow, lay it down, really rotate, low handle, minimal closure rate in the face. This is one, hey, a little steeper, not as rotated through the strike, exit a little more down the line. This works just fine as well, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing with me is my style of teaching is, and I tell people this all the time, I probably taught as many PGA Tour guys as anybody that's currently out there working on tour. And, Boo Weekley and Chris Kirk, I've taught Boo for years. They couldn't be any more different in their patterns, but they both are really successful ball strikers. Chris, he's always kind of had a steep, what would in modern times people would think he's steep, but he goes into a bunch of extension through the hit. The club always lines up with his grip. If we caught that video where the club head is in line with the grip on the downswing, you'd see it's not way underneath or way over, and then he goes into a bit of extension kind of to get it out of the ground. It's like this pattern works. Tom Hoagie is always top 10 in greens or regulation. I think he was last week. I looked, he was 5th or something, finished like 35th and he's got the same type steep pattern, and then he kind of gets out of the ground, and the club is really good from hands high through the hit. It's every guy doesn't look the same, and a lot of these different patterns work. And with Chris, he just when he hired me years ago, he just wanted to drive it a little bit better. He was completely happy with his iron play, so we've just tried to maintain what he does, maybe improve it just a little bit, but not change his pattern by any means. Like, not everybody, when Chris is at impact with an iron, he's somewhere between 1 degree closed and 1 degree open with his shoulders, where, you'll get people that lay it way down and they're 12 and 13 degrees open with their shoulders. It's more rib cage opening than shoulders, but that's kind of what you measure. So, that's just his pattern, and it works really well for him.
He's a great wedge player, and there's a lot of things that go into hitting a shot as far as like the launch angle, controlling the distance, et cetera, et cetera. Chris is primarily, he draws the ball, hits a little trap draw, starts it to the right, and draws it to the left. I would assume that's what he did with his wedge too, like a 3/4 wedge, same kind of shot.
It's the same.
When you look at Chris and you look at controlling these approach wedges, and you compare that to, say, the amateur player that's listening, where would you take that conversation to say, hey, I need to be able to flight it, hit a reliable shot, control my distance. Here's 2 or 3 things to consider to make those things happen.
Somebody that's helped me a bunch with like wedge stuff is Jeff Pierce. And really what I teach all my kids is I use lob wedges, and I always start out hitting 60-mile-an-hour shots. And what I try to do is, the 60-degree wedge at 60 miles an hour with a smash around 1, that ball is going to fly roughly 60 yards. So the biggest thing on a TrackMan, I'll put 6 numbers up. First thing I put up is club head speed. Then I put carry. Then I put launch, then spin, then smash, then spin loft. And what you're really trying to do is teach somebody, like, especially with the college kids I have come in, the bulk of them launch it too high.
Yep.
So if you can get a lob wedge launch 30 to 27.5, then you're going to have consistent contact and you're going to control the spin loft. The real trick of playing wedges is that you have the same spin and the same launch all the time. Well, even with Chris, it was last year at Palm Springs, we got on the back of the range and really worked on dialing his launches in, because I'd really started working on that after hanging out with Pierce a little bit with Doc Redman. And I mean, he was really great at it, but he just was a little bit unaware of some of the launches. And once he tightened the launches up, his great wedge play even got better. So the biggest thing, tour guys, even skilled like 1 or 2 handicaps, it's crazy how they can swing a club a certain club head speed. I kind of think about wedge play different than most people. Like, how far the ball goes is a byproduct of the club head speed. So, like, a lot of times people just set cones and markers out there and hit it. And some days you're good at it, some days you're bad. But everybody's really good at swinging a club a certain club head speed. And if you'll match that up with the launch, unless your club pass way off, you're going to hit pretty much the exact shot every time with the same spin. So whenever I'll teach a kid how to do it. And after they do it like 2 times, the spin variation in 5 shots will be less than 300. And the launch would be, I mean, you can put them out, show them on a TrackMan, the launches exactly. Once people start seeing that same shot come out of the window all the time, then they become a way better wedge player. So for the amateur, you just need to work on your launch. Now, that's challenging if you don't have access to a measuring device like a TrackMan, but you can still get out there and try to get a certain height if you're hitting to a tree or anything, where let me just get this ball coming out here the same height every time.
So you take a 56-degree wedge, you start, let's just say you're zeroing in on a particular speed. You're trying to hit that speed and hit that launch consistently, dialing that in.
Right.
And then from there, you can take a little speed off of it or add a little speed, but trying to keep the window the same.
Yeah, I mean, the routine I do with my college kids is I teach them the 60-degree, 60-mile-an-hour first.
Okay.
There can be variations. Some people are great at 62. Some people are great at 61. But I'll give them a stock baseline shot, and then I'll teach them how to do that. Then we'll do it with all 3 of their wedges. They're 54 and they're 50. And each time the gap is about 10 to 12 yards. So you have 3 shots that have about 8,500 spin on them. And then I'll tell them when they go home, practice this at this speed, and then practice 2 or 3 miles an hour slower, 2 or 3 miles an hour faster. And then all of a sudden you got a big bucket of a lot of shots that have the same spin, same launch, and it'll make you a way better wedge player.
That's what I always tell people. Like I say, you don't realize how low these best players launch their wedges until you get out there. And I said, they're not hitting it way up in the air. Can they hit it way up in the air? Yeah, they can. But these approach wedges are down. And I can remember playing with Zach Johnson in a Pro-Am one time. And I swear to God, these balls were like coming like over our head, out of the window, and just these little bullet draws. And I can remember talking to Mike Bender about it. And like, yeah, he'd hit these little trap draws. He'd get the path going 7 to the right, but it was the same window every time, tumbling left. And he's like, his distance control was so good. And you put the pin in the middle and a back left, and that ball kind of just tumbling left. That's the reason why he made so many shots. So many approach wedges. So it's,
I mean, I teach a bunch of tour guys, and I watch launch all the time. Duffner launches at about 27.5 with a lob wedge. Kirk's about 28. Wow. I mean, that's what they launch it at. And you get somebody in there, and the thing about it is, if you run somebody in and they're hitting balls, and especially when it's interesting when you're teaching them this drill, and then the next thing they launch one out at 34, well, that spin can go to 4,000. So it's like all of a sudden the spin loft's way off, and then you have a completely different shot coming out of the gun. So it really is. It's mastering club head speed and mastering launch is what I think helps people the most with wedges. And you're exactly right. Like, tour guys hit it way lower than you think they do.
Yeah. All right, let's get into get into this 10-year journey with Chris Kirk. I think this is a good discussion for my audience here on the pivot. And so I've got, for those listening, I've got a little sequence of Chris 10 years ago, back in 2014 when he was working with Scott. And then a little sequence up top, which was from the Sentry just, last week. And you and I were talking about basically how Chris has learned to kind of get his lower center a little bit more under his upper center in the backswing. And then that dynamic of, let's say, being a little more stacked and that value that has in transition as he moves left. And then from there, he can rotate and hit it. So just kind of setting the stage real quick. I'm going to demonstrate this for the audiences, because I think this is such an important piece of the puzzle, where this right hip, Scott, where for Chris, when he would turn and let's say, I'm just going to exaggerate, where that right hip maybe spins a little bit. It feels like, I know this move very well, Scott. This is my golf swing. My right hip would kind of spin around a little towards my left heel. And then my upper center, my top, my top button would kind of move a little to the right. And so the opposite of that is feeling that lower center, that belt buckle moving a little, maybe diagonally towards my right heel, and the right side of my pelvis kind of climbing and what feels like moving out a little bit, which then gets my upper center a little bit more on top of it, assuming I keep my head more centered. But the short story of this is that there's a little move you see with Chris now, where there's kind of like this little move laterally, and then he turns and stays right there. And it's not a sway. It's just more of a kind of this loading sensation into the right, and then that belt buckle getting more up underneath the upper center. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's 100%. Like when he started, he did what I called counterbalancing. He just what you described right there. He'd kind of send his center of his pelvis towards the target, and he would move his upper body behind it. And it's probably all those years, like in college, when you hit great big real high hooks, kind of that. It probably feels easy to do like that. The thing is, I've got a gear system. I've 3D numerous tour players. One of the big keys in being a great ball striker is keeping the sternum on top of the pelvis. So if the center of the sternum, the center of the pelvis, left arm parallel on the downswing, those two need to be about on top of each other. If you get the pelvis out in front and the center of the sternum behind, and the sternum's trying to catch the pelvis, you just never have great compression and face control.
Yeah.
So, there's guys that stack up and stay right on top of each other. And then there's people like Sergio Garcia, which has a really extreme where he keeps his head really centered and his pelvis moves way to the right. And then he slides his pelvis back up under his centered head. So with Chris, you can see as if you look at the third picture on the top, his spine's way more at 90 degrees right there in that frame, or closer to 90 degrees. And then he goes into a later right bend.
Yeah.
We found out with Chris, he drives it the best when he's only like 1 or 2 up and his swing direction is 3 or 4 to the right. That's when he drives it like in his compression, and he hits it more in the middle of the face.
Yeah.
Like the very first lesson I ever gave Chris, he came up to me on the range 10 years ago at a FedEx event, and he's like, I'm a pretty good iron player, but I just don't drive it accurately enough. I need some help with my driver. And his first swing on a TrackMan, he was 1 down and like 13 to the right with his swing direction. Well, the face just isn't really attacking the ball when you do that. So we worked really hard to kind of neutralize it. The most irritated Chris would get with me, though, is when I zero him out too much and he can't hit it out to the right. And obviously, he had it going on really well there at the Sentry. If anybody watched it, he's curving every shot right to left. But whenever he's not functioning well and the ball's too straight, he doesn't feel like he knows how to aim. And then the next thing, he gets his foot line lined up to the right and starts pushing it out there with his setup instead of with his golf swing. So the bulk of the time when I go on the golf course with Chris, I'm really just making sure that he's set up slightly open with his foot line, but can hit a push draw from there.
So he's slightly open with his stance line, but his shoulders are fairly square.
100%. Yeah.
And then he's using his attack angle, which he's using that attack angle where he hits down, it moves the path a little to the right. And so he doesn't necessarily have to aim right to hit it right. He's just, it's a slight push draw from a square stance. But I would imagine that if he had to cut it, he's definitely aiming left.
Well, when he won Colonial, I think maybe like 15, I think is when he won Colonial. And he wasn't driving it very well. And he actually kind of hit, and I think he kind of cut his driver around there that day just because he wasn't driving very well. Now, Colonial is one of those places he was putted really well and he ironed it really well, but he just wasn't swinging his driver that good. And he just used what he had and just kind of block cut it out there all day and still won the golf tournament on the final round. So he can do whatever with it. Like, he's super talented.
Yeah.
But, you know, it looked like to me, I've watched him play a lot of golf. He had it on autopilot over in Hawaii. It was pretty impressive.
So I think what I want to circle back here with Kirk is that you said that he's got some side bend at impact where the lower center has definitely moved a little more towards the target than the upper center. But that is not, and I think this is important for our audience, is that, you know, we're not trying to maybe necessarily create that in the backswing where you can see my lower center moving towards the target and my upper center, you know, off the ball. And I think, or I should say, it's not from the top where your lower center is bumping and your upper center is hanging back. You're not taking on that side bend early, right? What you see with Chris there is he's a little more lined up here, and then he's definitely keeping that a little more stacked in transition. And then as he turns to impact, that pelvis just continues to glide and move a little more out in front. So, you know, side bend is kind of managed or reduced, say, to the top and in transition, but then kind of, you know, it increases and evolves as you swing through impact.
I mean, definitely you're exactly right what you're saying. And anytime I'm giving a lesson, like when I'm watching people, especially if I'm in my outdoor place and not in my studio where I'm running 3D, I'll draw a line. Like I get a college kid, I'll draw a line up their right leg, just right up the outside of the right leg, and make sure they're not bumping towards the target on the backswing. Mm-hmm. That's just such a it's so hard to catch up if you're running your pelvis forward on the backswing. And, you know, it's like, even if you look at Kirk or any of the tour guys, if they move the center of the pelvis an inch and a half to the right, that's about it. It's not much. It's just not forward. The average guy's pelvic sway through the hip is somewhere between 4.5 and 3.4 inches. So you don't want to burn up that little bit. You got to go forward on your backswing is really what the truth of it is. And you don't want your sternum chasing your pelvis. Like when I started teaching Sneds, he had a bunch of that where he counterbalanced and his pelvis was forward and his upper was back, and he never caught up. He just never got his pelvis back up on top of the sternum. And then when he got it up there, then his iron play greatly improved.
Yep. And so just to clarify, the sternum chasing, meaning that the pelvis is already out in front, and then as you start down, it just can never catch up. It's always out in front. It never gets in line per se at the top.
And, you know, just for people listening, I can't tell you how important that is for short game and chipping. Yeah. If you get that sternum way behind that pelvis or a little bit behind that pelvis, that low point gets back behind the ball. Yep. So it's one of those things. I'd way rather have somebody with left bend, their spine bent left at the top of their wedge swings with shallow arms than ever have anybody where their pelvis is out front and their sternum's back with hitting a little pitch or chip shot.
Let me bring this in. This is Chris, and you mentioned 3D. And so this is your gears, right? And so this is how you know, when you measure them, this is how you get more of that exact movement of the upper center, the lower center, how much the rib cage is turning, how much the hips are turning, the inclination of, I think one of the things that's kind of cool is you can see the inclination of the pelvis, which as you start teaching this to someone, I think the idea that the right side of the pelvis is higher than the left, the right hip feels higher than the left at the top of the swing can be a big learning curve for a lot, because I think,
oh yeah, 100%.
you know, a lot feel like their hips need to turn level and around, and that kind of leads into some of the things we're talking about. So when you look at this is Chris Kirk's 3D. What would you kind of share with the audience here to kind of support the conversation we're having?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you look at those, so especially like the third frame where his left arm's parallel, and it's hard to see because there's so many lines on there, but
Yeah.
there's two little yellow dots that are right on top of each other. And then you look in the next frame, and then the lower of the pelvis is shifted out underneath. That's what you want. You want the body to be pretty close to 90 degrees right there. You know, I have guys, you know, Hudson Swafford, he'd be 88 right there when I taught him, and he's fade bias. So kind of that left bend and how the center of the sternum, the center of pelvis match up really dictate a little bit of the shot shape that you hit. Where Kirk, he rides them out on top of each other the whole time and then shifts his lower underneath. That's more of a draw bias pattern. Not always that way, but it is in this frame. The thing about Chris is my average tour guy's shoulder turns normally around 100 degrees to 120 degrees. Chris's shoulder turns only like 95, 96. So we try to keep him, you know, one thing that's really helped him is he's put this mass on his shoulder. He keeps his lead arm off his chest way better because he's thicker up top, and he has more lead arm adduction through the hip, which has helped him a bunch to get the club out in front of himself. So, you know, you just kind of got to, with tour guys, you got to work with what they are and just try to manage and just clean their golf swings up just a little bit to help, you know, 4 or 5%, make them that much better.
So his pivot improved, and he's definitely, let's say, a little bit more on top of it. And I think that's a term you hear. He's covering, he's a little more on top. And I think it'd be fair to say, like, in defining that means that the upper center is a little bit more stacked on the pelvis in transition, and they've got a little less side bend. The sternum's not trying to catch up like Sned's. And so they're a little more on top. They can compress it, they can control the face, all those things a little bit easier. And even with Chris being, let's say, a little bit on the steeper side, you mentioned something to me via text. You talked about the height of the handle through impact. I wish I would have stopped the one on the picture on the right at impact. But there's a term that's called the vertical swing plane. And the vertical swing plane is, you know, kind of this number, right? You were talking about, Scott.
Yeah.
All right, I start here where, let me get rid of this real quick, where, you know, I start with the shaft like this, the handle here. And for Chris, the butt of the club's probably pointing just under his belt buckle, thereabouts. And then when he comes down, that handle is, you know, it's a little bit higher, right? And so that shaft that impacts as measured to the ground is a little bit more vertical than, say, it was at address. And so you were talking that maybe getting that handle to not be as much here with Chris has kind of cleaned up some things as well. Is that something that you would find yourself working on with some players?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You know, it's like a tell-all when you get somebody in, they don't drive it very well. Like, I'll just kind of run the TrackMan and see what the vertical swing plane is. You know, the tour average vertical swing plane is about 48 degrees.
With a driver.
You know, taller guys can be a little higher. Kirk used to be like 53, 54 in that range, and now he's down. He's in the 49, 50s in that range all the time. So even though it looks steeper coming down, I mean, and the average guy that you see on the internet, the handle's way lower than it was. I even think maybe he adjusted his line angles last year a little bit, not so they weren't so upright. You know, the biggest case I think about, I taught Aaron Badley, I don't know, the last year that he won an event, and I'd only taught him that 1 year or maybe half the previous year and that year, and we got over to where he won in, I think it was in Mississippi or somewhere. And it was the first time Bad's vertical swing planes were like 56, 57.
Wow.
And he just kept working on it. And I got over there and he was like 49, 48, 50. I'm like, all right, we're rolling now. And he won that week.
Wow.
So it was, super interesting. It's not an exact, but it is kind of a tell-all.
Yeah.
You get some textbook Adam Scott looking guy or Justin Rose, their vertical swing planes are going to be in that 49, 50, 48 range almost every time.
So let me ask you this. Is there, and there's some different techniques that you can do to start to lower that, right? I mean, most common is if you got a caddy, just have them stand out in front of you and they just kind of hover that, that grip, just above the hands on the target side, and they're trying to get their hands kind of down underneath it and, getting the lower handle and the club kind of turning the corner versus that handle kind of riding up and down the line. Is there a time where you would, even though it's there, would you table it? Like, it's possible, like, okay, he's too steep, right? And then he's too steep, and then he raises the handle to still try to hit his draw, and he's backing up, and now he's doing a number of things based off of what the backswing, downswing, maybe shape is telling him that he has to do. So do you feel like anybody, you can just get in there and, hey, just sit right there, let's just get that thing lower regardless of the shape, and the ball still kind of stays around on the club face?
I mean, the bulk of the time when people have a high vertical swing plane, they're thrusting a lot, or their butt's coming into the ball and they're raising the handle. With Bads, that's what it was. He was thrusting a ton, like he had a radius change. So most of the time, I'm not exactly working on vertical swing plane. It's a byproduct of like cleaning guys' golf swings up and getting their posture and getting their impact posture greatly improved. So that's kind of the way I always go. And then it's just like, then you'll look up and you're like, oh, okay, we're getting somewhere because this is decreasing.
Yeah.
That's the way I go about it. I'm never a guy that really sticks something out there and tells somebody to swing underneath it. I've just never had a lot of luck with that,
I see the guy oftentimes steeping from the inside, like they're like, man, I'm steeping over the top. And then you show them on the numbers and it's like, well, no, your path is 5 to the right. Right.
Yeah.
And what they see is, they're like, they get it going this way, and then the club comes down, and then they kind of, they really thrust and stand the handle way up. And when you get that higher handle, what happens, folks, is that's a way to kind of move the path out to the right, get the face looking out to the right. So you can hit these push hooks, in doing that, but you can also get it going hard to the left. And so even though a player may feel steep, the path is still out to the right because of what they do at impact. So, sometimes that thrust can come from some other things. But would you agree that, like, if you go back to Chris, and this is kind of where I wanted to go with this, is that, like, you look at that club face going back, check. You look at the turn going back, as we saw, a nice turn stack, not a crazy turn. You just said 90 degrees. This isn't like, an absolute super athletic, crazy turn that we can't relate to. I mean, this is like everybody can do what you're looking at right there. Club face square, adequate turn to the top, upper center, lower center, relatively stacked. Okay. Let's start it down, maintain some of that relationship. Shaft just has to have some, some pitch back. Let's not, throw it way out in front of us. It's okay to be a little bit on the steeper side. And then from there, it's like, all right, now I can rotate and manage that vertical swing plane a little bit and how the club turns the corner, and you've got yourself a pretty reliable golf swing.
Yeah.
That easy, folks.
True statement. Not everybody has to swing it up there and add tons of lead wrist flexion and spin open like crazy, because, a lot of people just can't do it,
Right. I do some stuff, have a hack motion, and I was measuring my wrists. And so I was trying to get into the amount of the same wrist angle Victor Hovland is in at the top. And let me tell you something. I can do it without a club, but when I put a club in my hand, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't, I can, but it's like, it is really uncomfortable to get my wrist angles like Vic with a club in my hand.
Yeah.
And boy, I mean, it's like I want to get like that. And it's, all right. I mean, you can. I don't know if you're going to get like that, but you maybe can get a little bit of that. I mean, if you got crazy extension, I mean, okay, I mean, you can give me a little more flexion, but man, getting it into what Vic and Rom are actually at in measurement is, I'm not sure most can do it. Would you agree?
They can. The whole lead wrist flexion thing, I don't mind a bowed left wrist at the top because it squares the club face,
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people, it's ruined a lot of short games where the face got everybody was going into flexion really early. Well, you need loft on the face for abbreviated shots, So you take somebody like one time I teach Boo Weekly and I taught Joe Durant too. And I had him, Joe has a super weak left hand. Boo has a super strong left hand, just the opposite as you could get. Right. But I measured their face angle halfway back, and they had identical face angles halfway back. Just curious,
Yeah.
So Joe has kind of that weird where they have that super hard lead wrist flexion right through the hip, where they bow their left wrist way out right through the hip, and then Boo goes into flexion out of the top, so he has a real open club face, and then adds a bunch of lead wrist flexion on the down. They both work. Like my preferred golf swing really is a more neutral club face going back because it makes the short game easier.
Yep.
And then put some flexion in out of the top on the down to square the face, So, but it's whatever people do. Kirk gets the face pretty shut going back, and then kind of flips it open in the second half of the backswing. He's always done that. The face is looking at the ball pretty hard. A third of the way back, and then he opens it up in the second half of his backswing. So there's just a lot of ways to skin the cat. And that's what I tell people more than anything is just don't get stuck on one pattern, man.
Then you got Justin Thomas posting his swing like every other day. He's got his hands out there and the toe pointing straight up in the sky like that.
Yeah.
And the average player looking at that, you're like, oh my God, like this is, I'm not sure if they need to be looking at that, but he's out here wide face, toe up, rotating it, very high left arm. And, it's kind of been JT's swing since he turned pro. Although I did some research on JT, and I actually found a swing, Scott. I don't know if you saw this. I'll send it to you. When he was in college at Alabama, his left arm in college, it was right there.
Oh, wow.
It was right there.
I've never seen one of those.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you.
Higher arm stuff.
I mean, everything pro is up here. Everything.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. I'd love to ask him the question on when did that change? Because when you see the difference in these two, you'll be like, oh wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah, it's those. There's certain guys that can shallow a bunch. It's like talking to Sneds or Duffner. Those guys, they're not ever going to swing it up there and drop it way in behind themselves. So they kind of have to have more kind of up and down the plane type golf swings. Like if you draw a shaft plane line, those guys got to stay pretty close to it because they don't have a lot of shallowing mechanism.
Right.
But then, you have other people that can drop it down that looks all cool, falling in behind them and square it up. And, those guys can have a little higher left arm.
Yeah.
So, it's just kind of working through it like that.
All right, let's finish with this. Here's another guy. You have 7 in the field this week at Sony. Here's a guy, Mav McNeely.
Yeah.
That is coming back from a medical, right? He had an injury. You were telling me, tell the story. He had an injury kind of up in his left shoulder,
where his collarbone where your collarbone, and I don't know the anatomical word for it, but where the collarbone goes up under your neck right there, it's a pretty weak joint in your body. So Mav's golf swing, he'd swing it up there and he kind of unloaded it quite a bit out of the top, and then his left shoulder got way high through impact, and he put tons of pressure when he was using his right hand to square the face, and it put tons of pressure on that collarbone right there. So what we've done with Maverick is we've tried to get him where he didn't unload it, and he'd run out in front of it and then then try to line the club up with his left arm with his right hand, and then push his left shoulder way up in the air. So our goal with him is to get it up there up top and not have him dump it out so fast, and kind of hold a little bit of angle where he can stay more down on it and have his shoulders way more level to the ground. So his left shoulder is not nearly as high. So he's going to lean it more and take more of a divot, more of a boo weekly than like what he was doing before, to get the pressure off that shoulder joint, or whatever that joint's called. So he's done a great job. It's not exactly where I want it, but I was with him in Vegas, I don't know, a month or so ago, and we're getting pretty close. Like he's, when I first started helping him, he couldn't even hardly take a divot. Now he can hit the back of the ball and take some turf out in front of it, get the low point out in front of the ball, stabilize the face a little bit.
Wow.
So, Maverick's such an incredible putter. I think he's the best putter on the PGA Tour. So we'll find out if I'm any good with my job with him. So,
so when you say unloading it early, you're talking here in the wrist, right?
Yeah.
So he's starting to unload.
And he not only cocked it like that, but he cocked it into a steep.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like a Piercy or somebody, Scott Piercy, that uncocked it, but cocked it kind of in line. Mav cocked it into a steep.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And then when he would race out in front, that, his sternum's out in front, and then and then he would kind of stand it up to get it in line.
Yeah. Then he'd make the left shoulder like a real high left shoulder to shallow it. Like his shallower was like a pop your left shoulder way up in the air and right bend.
So he's got more angle, and then he probably feels like he's more out in front of it and around.
It's the combo we have is where he feels like he's way behind, like his head stays back, but his left shoulder stays down and around.
Okay.
Yeah.
That left shoulder, let's finish with this. That for our audience here. That left shoulder down and around. How do you is there a go-to for you on that? I find myself getting to that point with players where you're not trying to go this way, right? You're trying to get them like you want it to be, like it feels like that left shoulder's going down, and then it feels like the shoulders are kind of more level and then this way, right? I mean, naturally, you're always going to be a little this way, but the idea is you're not pow. Is there a go-to for you in that field?
I seriously work on this all the time, especially with players aren't quite as skilled.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things. It's kind of a challenging thing to work on because the feel of it makes people over the top,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So it's like we'll do a lot of stuff. Like Bailey Tardy, the LPGA girl I teach, had a super high left shoulder, way hung behind it. So with her, we've just done tons of more of actually fixing the center of the pelvis, the center of the sternum, cleaned hers up a bunch. She'd be somebody that hit 4 up on it, and her swing direction would be 7 or 8 to the right with a driver.
Wow.
So she had no fade in there whatsoever.
Yeah.
So we've just shifted her, leveled her out, and shifted her over on top of it way more so her left shoulder could work down and around. A lot of times I'll take like a part of a pool noodle, like a little cheap thing you buy at the dollar store, and put it in their left shoulder and make them feel like they can turn that pool noodle down and around. They can see it and hit chippy shots to get a feel for it. But you always kind of got to offset it and go, hey, this has got to feel like it's really coming from the inside when you do this, because you jump somebody up there and down and around them, that club's going way up and over their hands. They're going to be steep. So they'll do it twice and quit. So the big thing with teaching is you got to go, hey, we're going to do this. This is a fade bias move. We got to offset this a little bit. Let's fix this, but not let your path get way left.
There's a time and place for it. That's for sure. That you're not defaulting to that with everybody. But when you do get to that point in development with the player, it's a fun place to be, because you do have a lot of nice things happening. And so when you can get them to feel that and how to turn the corner, boy, that just like completes it all. All of a sudden,
that's the magic there. Yeah,
Whoa.
And that's really with Mav. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that lead
Okay.
shoulder down in place, but still be able to hit it from the inside a little bit because he likes to draw it, you know.
Yep. Awesome, man. Good stuff. Appreciate your time. Chris Kirk, I picked him to go back-to-back.
Golly, I like the way you're thinking, bud.
I'm trying to get you that second bonus here coming back from Hawaii. You're the man, Scotty. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. See you, buddy. Bye.
All right.